Hello, and welcome to Joline Knits A Lot. I'm Joline, and this is my show about knitting and possibly other crafts. Today, there's a little bit of baking. So thanks for joining me. Make yourselves comfortable, grab your craft of choice, maybe a cozy beverage, settle in, and let's talk about some crafting. What have you been up to the last couple of weeks? I've been knitting a lot. I've also started my Christmas baking. I'm very lucky in the sense that I have two daughters who are very interested in baking and are very helpful. So we've made probably 3 or 4 kinds of cookies, some squares. I had a failed attempt at biscotti. It was really disappointing actually. I used a Martha Stewart recipe and Martha Stewart led me astray. The recipe for the biscotti was from an older magazine and it was just really dry. And having never made biscotti before, I wasn't sure what the dough was supposed to look like. And let me tell you, it was disappointing. So I reverted to standard, the American Test Kitchen cookbook. If you've never heard of the American Test Kitchen, they have magazines and they also have many different cookbooks. And what they do is they try lots of different ways of making the recipes, and then they only publish the one that works the best. So I used their biscotti recipe from one of their cookbooks, and I played around a little bit with the flavors, and I was really happy with the results. So if you're looking to make some biscotti this year or anytime, I guess I would recommend the American Test Kitchen Family Cookbook. There's also a sort of standard recipe for me that means Christmas, and I'm going to talk about that a little later and share a recipe with you. So look forward to that later in the show. For right now, I think we'll talk a little bit about finished objects. Have you finished anything? Have you been madly knitting things for Christmas? I often find myself knitting Christmas gifts right up until the day, but this year has been a little bit different for me, I think partly because I've had so much time at home, more time than normal, in the sense that I haven't been running my kids around to different activities because of COVID. So I've had a little bit more knitting time, and I've had a lot of gifts sort of stashed away. I was having a talk with a friend of mine about this, and I think part of it was that with COVID and weird things happening, I knit a lot of smaller objects so that I would have a sense of completion, I think, and fulfillment, and my attention span just wasn't in it for like larger, more complicated patterns or projects. And so I knit a lot of kind of smaller things, as you saw, I think, in previous episodes, just smaller things with maybe a little bit of color work or interest. And then I just set them aside. So some of those will be gifts for this year. Some of them might be gifts for next year. Some of them might be gifts throughout the year. But it was nice, I think, and it was what I needed at the time, was to just knit smaller things that weren't super, like taking up a lot of brain space in a time when brain space was sort of at a premium. So I have a pair of socks that you may have seen last episode, but I knew that they were going to be too long for the person that I intended to knit them for. And I thought I would leave them and see, but really in my heart I knew that they were too long. So I decided to pick up some stitches around the toes. So what I did was I used my needles, and I went in. If you can see, it's a 5-row repeat. There's a plain round, then a round of 2 alternating stitches, and then a plain round, and then 1 round of alternating stitches. And what I did was I took my needle and I picked up stitches all the way around on a plain round, and then I unpicked the toe and I pulled it back, and then I started again, and I just knit the toe from that point. The finished object is much more the size that I want them to be. This is the first sock and this is the second sock, so this is more of a rehab project than a new project. But I'm really happy, I think, that I did that. It really didn't take that much time to do, and I'm happy that I now have a pair of socks that are the appropriate size. I don't have to worry about going back and fussing with them later. So that's pair 1 of the Spark socks. This is a pattern by Andrea Mowry. I knit it in Sheepy's Metropolis in the Philadelphia colorway, and this is the dyed in the wool in the Meadows colorway, I believe, by Spin Cycle. So that's pair 1 of Sparks socks. But if you recall, I was knitting a few pairs of these, and this is pair number 2. Now I learned from my first pair, and I only knit so many repeats of this 5-row stitch pattern on the foot before starting the toe, so I knew that these would be a better fit. And last week I had 1 sock, and now I have 2. I think these are definitely more fraternal twins. The colorways are quite different from sock to sock. And again, that's part of the beauty of the Spin Cycle yarn. This is the Sheepy's Metropolis in the Beirut colorway. And then the Spin Cycle is Castaway, which reminds me of like Caribbean water and sandy beaches. So that is pair number 2 of the Spark socks, upside down, by Andrea Mowry. So that is really nice to have a rehabbed pair and a finished object set aside for Christmas. Then if you recall, I was going to be knitting a pair of the Spark socks for myself too. Now this is a pair that if they got done before Christmas, it wasn't a big deal. But again, this sock is surprising in how quickly it knits up. And I don't know if it's because of the color work or if I'm using a slightly larger needle or if my gauge is that much bigger, but it just goes so quickly. I cast this sock on a Sunday, and I think I finished it on Wednesday, and then I started the second sock. So I'm really moving along. So I have a hoe to share with you. A hoe is a half object or half a finished object. And this is the Sheepy's Metropolis in the Miami colorway. Now somebody explain to me, does Miami really look like this? It still surprises me. My contrast color is Mississippi Marsala. It's a dyed in the wool, again, Spin Cycle yarn. But this one is interesting. I have knit with the Mississippi Marsala before, and the skein looked very different. And I think that is a testament to the process of how this yarn is made. From skein to skein, they can be very different. You either like that or you don't like that. I have really enjoyed knitting with this, and certainly in this sock, there's a section right through here that's quite low contrast. That doesn't bother me for a finished sock. I mean, these are cozy house socks, and so I kind of like that they fade in a really interesting way. But the only problem with that was I didn't have a lot of contrast in through this section, so sometimes it was hard to tell if I just finished 2 rounds of the alternating color, contrast color and main color, or if it was just 1 round. So I really had to pay attention to what I was doing because it was really hard to see through there. With this really bright light on it, it's more obvious, but certainly through here, it was a little bit tricky. And that was just a combination of the contrast color that I used and the main color. But I really like how it turned out, and this heel is kind of cute. It looks a bit like a sunrise or a sunset. It's quite pretty. But again, the second sock is going to look quite different. So this is the first sock, and this is my second sock that I've been working on. Ooh, I dropped some stitches. Forgive me while I pick up a couple little stitches. There we go. Much better. So this is sock number 2, and it really does look quite different. Look at that. It's I'm very much getting into oranges, but there's some really nice like cherry reds, and then if you kind of peek into the ball a little bit, I don't know if you can see there's some browns coming up, but also I have a section coming up where it's orange, kind of barber pulled with a almost turquoisey blue. So I'm looking forward to watching how this color sort of progresses through as I knit. But as you can see, again, very fraternal twins. And I have one sock done, and I'm almost at the point where I put in the waist yarn for the heel, so I almost have a sock and a half done. And so these will, I think, for sure be done by Christmas time, especially given how quickly they're going. And I just work on them in the evenings. And it's been a really enjoyable pattern, and surprisingly, I'm not tired of the pattern yet, which is, for me, unusual, because I have been knitting now. This is my 6th sock, and I'm not sick of the pattern yet, but I think I'll be glad to move on to something else once I finish these 3 pairs of Spark socks. I will tuck those away and show you a couple other of things that I've been working on. So as you know, I have a couple of advent calendars. The 24 stripe advent yarns that I got. The first one I'm going to show you is the Curvy Wurvy one. It's the Super Shitty 2020 sock yarn based on Schitt's Creek. And I finished one sock. I stuck in an afterthought heel. So I have another hoe. This yarn again, I used the Sheepies Metropolis in the Warsaw colorway. And then I moved on to a nice big tube of the Curvy Wurvy sock yarn. Now the great thing about this yarn is that every color comes with a quote from the show. And they're so much fun to read while you're knitting. Some highlights are this one, which is "You Are My Mariah Carey." I love that one. And then this one is I like the wine, not the label, which is another classic Schitt's Creek quote that I really like. So I have a hoe done, and I have another probably half a sock done. I'm just about at the point, I'm just past the point where I stuck the heel in. Ooh, dropping needles now. Okay, let's see. Yep, I'm past the point where I stuck the heel in, so I'm moving quite quickly on, which is really exciting, and I think I'll have another pair of fun stripy socks to wear at Christmas time. The goal is to be knitting 2 stripes a day. Each sock I've made 24 stripes, so if I knit on this one 2 stripes a day, then I knit the heel and the toe, and I started on this one. So I'm moving on, knitting 2 stripes a day to sort of keep pace, so that by Christmas Eve I should have another pair of socks completed. And these ones I think are so fun. I just love that the colors are not Christmassy. They're just super crazy and super fun. There's little pops of neons. There's a really kind of interesting bright coral color here that I really like. And that just makes them so much fun to knit, and super wearable, because what doesn't a pair of crazy socks go with? And that is my first Advent pair of sock yarns, and another hoe off the needles. And my final project that I have been working on is my Cozy Knitter 24 stripe Advent sock yarn. And I finished the first sock. These ones to me are more Christmassy, but I do like the way that she incorporates a lot of different colors that are create a really kind of cozy mood. Cozy Knitter is a great name for this sock yarn. But there's lots of reds and greens and different shades of reds and greens, but I like the cozy, like this really warm gray and this brown together. There's some really nice sort of mauvey burgundy browns, and I really like the blues. So as you're knitting this pattern, again, you come across really cozy colors, and it's so much fun to get to the next stripe. I used, say it with me, Sheepies Metropolis in the Naples colorway for my contrast color, and I think it's really a great red to include with all these other crazy Christmassy colors. I'm gonna have lots of this yarn left, the red, so I'll just tuck it away, and next year when I'm knitting another pair of Christmas socks, I will have it for heels and toes. The other thing I did with this yarn that I may do, or my Cozy Knitter skein from last year, which I may do again this year, is I tucked half of the yarn away. Since I only used half to make my pair of socks, I tucked half away, and then in July I knit 2 pairs of Christmas and July socks. And I think I'll be doing that again this year, and I can make 2 pairs, a Kirby Werby pair and this cozy knitter pair. So here's my last hoe. 3 hoes, a hoe trifecta, ho 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 if you will. And then I have the other sock has been moving along quite nicely too, and I think I've just gotten to the point where I put the heel in. So I'm making really good progress with these too, and I think I'm going to have, hopefully, a whole lot of socks ready at Christmas time, which is exciting, but it also means that I'm getting a little bit sick of knitting socks, which is kind of weird for me. I often have a pair of socks on the needles. I knit socks for myself, socks for gifts, socks for family members, socks a lot. And I think it's because they are a small project that I can tuck in a bag. I don't need a pattern because I know how to knit socks, and I'm very familiar with the process. I don't need to look it up at all. So I often have socks with me. They're a convenient small project on the go. But I'm not going anywhere right now, especially with COVID. So I have been, while I've been knitting a lot of socks at home, I think that I'm going to move to some other, maybe bigger projects, because I don't need to have a small project with me to take places. So I'm not really going anywhere. So I have some plans that I think I will share with you. But before I do, I apologize for not telling you what I'm wearing today. This is my original Love Note sweater. Frequent viewers may recall I knit a Love Note hack sweater recently, and I changed up the lace pattern to kind of a feather and fan motif. And so it was sort of an homage to the Love Note with a little bit of a different lace pattern. This is the original one. I used, so you can see the heart lacy patterns through here. It's just such a great, cozy, comfortable sweater pattern. This one I used 1 strand of a plain fingering weight yarn, undyed, and then the other one is a Surrey alpaca and silk blend made by Farmer's Daughter Fibers, in, I believe that yarn is called Oh Dang. And I held those 2 yarns together. It's a much more high contrast look than the pattern sort of calls for. The pattern recommends using similar shades, but I saw some pictures of people who used a more high contrast, and I thought it looked really interesting. So that's what I went for. I used 2 strands of the Surrey alpaca silk, and I used all of it. In fact, I knit until I had very little left, and then I knit the ribbing until I was running out of yarn, and then I bound off. And in fact, I think that I ran out of the Surrey alpaca before I was finished binding off. I'm trying to find where I finished. So I completed the bind off just with the white because I wanted to use every scrap of it. I know that this pattern calls for a mohair blend, but mohair to me is very prickly. I really like the alpaca silk as an option to the mohair. I was at a local yarn store when one of the owners was wearing this sweater in a cream. I think she'd knitted in cream with a cream, 2 cream yarns held together, and I just loved it. And I was talking to her about how I really liked the look of the sweater, but I don't like mohair. And she suggested the Surrey alpaca silk, and she was 100% correct. I really like it. It's soft against my skin. I wear just like a little sort of tank top underneath because, as you can see, the lace gets a little bit low. So I just wear a tank top underneath, and it's not itchy and it's not uncomfortable. So if you also have issues, concerns, reactions to mohair, I might recommend the Surrey alpaca silk as an option. It is slightly heavier, but I don't find that it made a big difference in this project, especially when I was holding it together with a fingering weight yarn. Also, alpaca, but mohair as well, is a very warm yarn. So even though it's very fine, adding it can make for a much warmer sweater than you may anticipate. So just know that before you start using it. But it's really lovely, and I would highly recommend it if you're interested. So that's what I'm wearing, but what am I dreaming of? So you know how you go through periods where you're like, I just want to knit something easy, I just want to knit something plain, and I've definitely been going through that recently. I just wanted simple things, maybe a little bit of color work, but nothing too crazy. But I'm finally in a headspace where I want to knit something more challenging, and this couldn't have come at a more perfect time. So Laine magazine is a magazine out of Scandinavia. I want to say Finland. Is that right? It's beautiful. They definitely have an aesthetic that is all their own. It's sort of moody. Yes, Finland, I believe, is where it's from. Ooh, it's printed in Estonia. That's interesting. Anyway, I digress. It definitely has a mood and a look to the photography, and that's due, I think, to the two women who write and edit this magazine. They definitely have an aesthetic. That aesthetic is sort of almost simple but modern, Scandinavian, and I really have always really gravitated towards this magazine. I think it's beautiful, and I love when a new one comes out. So I own all of the issues, and I like to go back. There's always recipes in them, and really interesting patterns. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I will show you the two things that have sort of sparked my creative juices. Is that right? That sounds weird. Sparked my creativity, I guess. And this is the first one. It is called Snowy Forest. Ta-da! It's a really beautiful cabled sweater. And I'm not usually a fan of this sort of heavy neckline, but I like that it's sort of folded up, and it's like a sturdy neckline, but it's also quite open. I think you can see in this picture how while it's a ribbed neckline with some substance, it's not close to the neck, which I kind of am really interested by. So when this magazine came out, I saw that and I was like, okay, check. That is something that I would like to knit. I think it'd be a really cozy knit over the Christmas break. And so I was like, make a note of that. The other sweater that really has piqued my interest is this one. It is called the Sealy sweater, and it is both a cardigan and a pullover. And I think part of why this interested me is because of this really beautiful sleeve work. And as I was reading about this on Ravelry, there was some interesting sort of tidbits on the patterns before I got the magazine. There was a discussion on the color work that is new to me. It is an Estonian technique. It is described as an inlay technique that creates an embroidery-like look. And I was like, I think I'm ready to try something new. I think I'm ready to try a new technique. And so this sweater really piqued my interest. And so, of course, I had to run out and get some yarn. These things happen. It's a pandemic. I'm stuck at home. Here in Alberta, we're not allowed to gather with other people outside of our household. Retail shops are sort of shut down to just a few people in them. Restaurants are closed to dine in, so you can eat at home, but not with other people. And so I was like, you know what? I'm ready to sort of I'm ready to expand my brain a bit. I'm ready to try something new. I'm ready for a challenge. And so I popped by a local yarn store. This one was called, the yarn store I went to is called Fiber Nook. Fiber Nook has done a really good job of maintaining business through the pandemic. They have been open for shopping by appointment, and they were open on weekends until recently when more restrictions were put in place where we live. And so now you can go in, you can book an appointment and shop. Well, there's like a maximum of 3 customers in the store, plus somebody working there. They're super helpful. They have a great selection of yarns. They also do curbside pickup. And so I'm really happy for them that they have been able to maintain this sort of business model through the pandemic. So I booked an appointment and I went and I did a little bit of shopping, and I got this Haynes Creek Heathers Gathering Yarns. This is a worsted weight Aran yarn in the ecru colorway, and this is for that cabled sweater. I think it'll be a really nice cozy winter sweater, especially with those beautiful cables. So I'm looking forward to winding this yarn up. I bought, how many did I buy? I bought a number of skeins, I think 5. Who can say? I bought enough to make the cabled sweater, and I'm going to be casting this on as soon as my Spark socks, my last pair of Spark socks, is finished. So this is exciting, and I haven't done cables in a little while, so that's something that sometimes I have to be in the mood for different knitting techniques. I'm not sure if you find this too, but lately I've been in a colorwork mood, and this sweater, this Snowy Forest sweater, has inspired me to pick up my cabling needles again. I actually cable without a needle. We'll talk about that in another episode, but I'm looking forward to winding up this yarn and casting on that sweater. I think it'll be really great. And then the colorwork sweater. So I sort of hemmed and hawed about what yarn to use, what color would I like, and I think that I was inspired a little bit by the Pantone colors of the year for 2021, which isn't usually me, but the colors for next year are yellow and gray. And so I was like, I could use something bright and cheerful. And so I purchased 6 skeins of, wait for it, Sheepy's Metropolis. So exciting. This yarn, I'm telling you, I just love that it comes in so many colors and it's such a sturdy, really nice yarn to knit with. So I'm going to be knitting the body of the sweater in Sheepy's Metropolis, too much glare, in the Alexandria colorway. This color is blowing out a bit, but as you can see, it's like a really sort of buttery yellow, I want to say, but it's heathered and it almost has flecks of, like, I want to say pink or orange or peach. So it's quite a rich color in the sense that it does have other tones in it. And so this is going to be the body of my sweater. I am not sure what my contrast colors are going to be. I think one of them will be a gray, and I think I might be using the leftovers of this gray, which is Miami. Still confused as to how this deep gray is Miami. But I think I might be using this as a contrast with that. And I think that'll be quite bold. And then I have some cream yarn left over for the other contrast color. In reading the pattern, you only need about 50 meters of one of the contrast colors and maybe 100 meters of the other. So you really only need small amounts of the contrasting yarns. So I'm definitely going to use stash yarn for that. There's no point in buying a whole skein when I have an assortment of different colored yarns sort of just at my disposal downstairs in my stash. So I plan on, when I'm ready to cast this on, I'll go and hunt down my contrast colors, but I'm fairly confident that this gray will be really great. as one of the contrasts. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited actually to have some new projects on the horizon, to have some new techniques to learn, and revisiting some cabling, and just starting fresh, starting something new, and starting something that isn't socks. No offense, socks. So I have only had a chance to kind of briefly look through this Laine magazine. I'm looking forward to spending a little bit more time with it. There's some really interesting patterns in it that I think I may be looking at knitting in the future. There's also some interesting articles that I'd like to have a chance to sit back and read. And yeah, I'm looking forward to just spending a little bit of time perusing this beautiful magazine. And I'm so glad we started making it again. It was, they were sort of decided after the 9th issue that they were going to stop making issues of Laine magazine, and they only put out 2 a year. And I was kind of disappointed because it is one of the magazines that I really, really enjoy, and I've tried to pick up every issue as soon as it comes out. So I just like that they've sort of cast their net wider and are inviting a sort of wider base of designers and models to showcase their work. It's a similar aesthetic. It's still like a very moody, neutral Scandinavian sort of vibe, but they're inviting a lot of different people to contribute to that, and I think that's great. So I look forward to spending some time with this magazine in the next few days before I cast on for one of my new sweaters. Now, I have one last thing that I wanted to share with you in my last show before Christmas time, and that is a holiday favorite for me. When I was a kid growing up, my mom did a lot of holiday baking, and by a lot I mean we had a freezer in our house that was almost completely dedicated to Christmas baking. My mom would host a big Christmas party at some point in December, probably earlier on in December, and then she would also bring lots of baking to our neighbors around our house, and she would also bring lots of baking to share with our family get-togethers at Christmas time. So baking was very, very much a part of our Christmas tradition. One of the things I loved that she made and makes is Butter Tart Squares. Sorry, Butter Tarts. My mom would make tiny little butter tarts about this big around in a tiny little mini muffin tin. They were so much work, and I remember her taking hours and hours rolling out the dough, cutting little circles, fitting them into the little tins, and then filling them with the butter tart filling, baking them. And they were so tiny that it would take forever to make a dent in all of the dough that she had prepared. But they were one of my favorite things, and the taste of them reminds me of Christmas. And a number of years ago, I found a recipe for Butter Tart Squares, which are way more simple. It's sort of a shortbread base that you bake all at once, and then you, while it's baking, you mix your topping, you throw that on top and bake it, and it's much more my speed. It has all the flavors of butter tarts that I love without all the effort. And so I have a couple to share with you today. Woo! Oh, I'm so looking forward to eating these. Now that I've shown you, I can take some bites when I'm finished podcasting. But Butter Tart Squares are definitely a holiday staple for me, and I'm happy to share a recipe with you in the links below. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope that this year, while it may look different for a lot of us, has some of the familiar things that you're used to, like Butter Tart Squares, spending some time with people that you love, and if you can't spend time with them in person, then spending time with people you love virtually, through FaceTime or on the phone, or in any way that makes you feel connected in some way to the people that you love. I hope that you have a chance to feel some peace at this time of year, There's so many of us who spend time knitting and crafting, and I hope that the feel of fiber in your hands and needles reminds you that there are so many of us who turn to our knitting or our crafting for comfort and for joy, and I hope that you find that in the next couple of weeks. I hope you find some time to do the things that you love to do. I know that I plan on knitting a lot.